Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
People might not realise this. Certainly it comes rushing up to me as well. But this week is Parents in Sport Week. And so who better to bring back to the talent equation than non-perfect dad himself, Richard Shaw. So Richard, welcome back.
Mate, it's good to be here. And yes, Parent in Sports Week. It only seems like yesterday I was looking at all the tweets and what different clubs and sports were doing for parent engagement last October, and we're here again.
It's brilliant, isn't it? And last time round was the infamous week where I was being a sports parent on the side of the pitch and getting it all wrong. So I mean, if ever it could be, I'm hoping to not fall into the same sorts of pitfalls this Parents in Sport Week, because I don't necessarily want to always be the advert for non-perfectness. However, anyway. So good to have you back. What's been happening in the world of non-perfect dad since we last spoke?
The last year's just been brilliant. It's just been an incredible privilege for me. I think there certainly is, a shift in mentality among coaches to stop seeing parents as the enemy, to create us and them boundaries. And it's just been an absolute thrill for me to be invited into national governing bodies or national coaching pathways or grassroots clubs and professional sports teams who are recognising their need to be trying to engage with the parent. Sometimes that's come about because they recognise that actually their athletes are affected more by their parents, despite how good a coaching environment they have. So there's an honest reaction to the revelation there that actually parents are powerful and that power cannot be ignored, and we need to work with that. And secondly, I think a lot of coaches are parents, and as their children kind of go through that system, they realise the other side of the coin as a parent. They're starting to see how parents actually feel and engage with that process. And so for me, it's been a really exciting year, partnering with lots of people. So for example, some of the highlights for me were doing a talk to the England under-20 rugby parents, which wasn't just an information exchange. It was a genuine parental information engagement piece. We did it in the form of a pub music quiz because their sons were about to play rugby in front of 7,000 people at Franklin Gardens. So I didn't think they wanted me talking at them for an hour. Well, not that I ever talk to anyone for an hour, but and so we did it as a pub music quiz, and I found songs that tenuously linked to the challenges of parenting a under 20. So Adele's Hello from the Other Side. So we had a conversation about communication and about how 20-year-old lads, not all, but a number within the room were just enjoying life and not always communicating with home, and how do you manage those emotions as a parent. It was a real privilege this weekend. I was at Millfield. I love going to Millfield. They have such a great participation model. They're renowned perhaps for the pathway and the excellence that they have in sport, but actually they're underpinned by such a great participation model and environment. And John Mallett came up with the idea of me doing a halftime team talk with the under-16s. So went on the pitch, got the under-16s parents from Millfield on the pitch. So the two teams were having their halftime team talks on the pitch, and then we were having a parents' halftime team talk on the pitch. That was really exciting. And for me, I think what we're starting to see, Stuart, is people move away from information exchange to actually helping coach parents. and to think about, and I wouldn't necessarily tell parents I'm coaching them, because I don't know how parents necessarily respond to that, but certainly I think in my mind, I'm trying to help institutions think, not how can we just box parents in or give them the information they need, but how can we coach them in the real life situations that they find themselves in the real emotional journey of it as a set of parents. My son got concussed playing rugby yesterday, and he has his next part of his Saracens pathway. He's in the very early stages of the Saracens pathway. I don't think he'll be there for very long because he's a bit of a hobbit, bless him. But that immediate thing of all three of us looking, when he was concussed and he said, well, I can't do any sport this week, Dad, can I? And he was managing that really maturely because he loves his sport. And inside I was like, this is great. You're making really good decisions. And he was like, oh, I'm going to miss the game next Sunday. We looked at the diary and saw it was his next part of this. And we missed the last one because we were on holiday. And all of us were like, oh, no, what does this mean? Now, thankfully, my wife looked at the Saracens email. The Saracens email was very, very clear. If you're injured, your child will not be penalised. And I said to him, well, mate, if you can't go and that means the end, then that's just one of those things. But there was part of me, Stuart, inside was like, oh, it's a week away. Could he? Even because it's like there's my son and his disappointment, and so for me, it's about how do we coach parents to make health, not necessarily the right decisions, but make healthier choices and healthier support of children and coaches in that process. And so we're starting to see organisations start to do that better.
Now, fantastic intro. There's loads in there. I mean, one of the things that I think that's really interesting, a couple of things you mentioned about not coaching parents. I suppose that depends on how you see the role of a coach. So I think a lot of people see coach and they say, oh yeah, we're coaching parents, and they'd have a visceral response to that, because it's almost a bit like, well, you're training them or you're teaching them or anything like that. And in those contexts, then that's definitely not what this is about. But if you see coaching kind of how I see coaching, which is being kind of a navigator or a guide by the side, so to speak, or a sense maker, which is, kind of working with a group of people to help make sense of their lived experiences in order to help them determine what the next steps for them might be. It's just helping them, I guess, to break through and reframe and see things in a different way. Then that's very much within that kind of coaching model, as far as I would be, I would be concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose the reason I probably wouldn't use the word "I'm going to coach you" as parents is because I wonder if you need to kind of, I don't know. I think because of the baggage of the word, like you've just said, but certainly for me, it's about helping parents get past the surface fluff and start dealing with the kind of deeper stuff, really. And I think traditionally our parent engagement models have dealt with the presenting issues and just tried to give information around those. So one of the big bees in my bonnets is those big signs by pictures saying, parents, we respect, and do all that here. Now, I don't think you'd find a parent in the country who'd look at that sign and go, well, that's wrong. I don't agree with that. Because we that kind of respect is part of our cultural upbringing and kind of what we all agree with. However, in the heat of sport, there are lots of parents who don't do that. And I know myself, how do I manage myself on a sports pitch? I take myself as far away from parents and coaches as possible because I like them all when we're in the bar afterwards talking, but I know that their behaviour sometimes affects me, and so I want to self-manage. But if everybody's together in a tribal mentality, we land up giving those kind of platitudes. Oh yeah, we all respect each other here. Yeah, but how do we coach parents to respect one another? So for me, it's things like sending the card round to the ref to give a thank you card to the ref, getting parents to sign that in the first half of the game. Let's just start coaching that act of, I want to call it mindfulness or gratitude or whatever, for the coach to try and just start to see for the ref, just try and start to see a little bit of a change there. And the challenge for me is, how do we help coach parents when they're not near the pitch? Because let's be honest, their biggest impact is not necessarily on the pitch. I mean, I know all the headline stories about parents tend to be pitch side stories, but for me, I think that the parent is a bigger asset and a bigger challenge to a child releasing their potential when we're not with them. So how do we help coach parents. So the book Conversations for the Journey was one idea, and I'm really excited, Stuart, about this collaboration that we've just done together.
You see, you're teasing now. You're teasing.
I am. I'm just slipping that in there. Let's not mention it for another 10 minutes.
People will be fast forwarding through the next little bit. Okay, so just to round that off, though, and actually this will lead us nicely into what you've just talked about. I mean, I see the approach you take to, kind of engaging with parents in the sports context is very aligned to, I guess, the philosophy that I talk about a lot and I espouse a lot on the show, which is that the coaching process, if you like, or the learning process, is guided predominantly by experience and environment. So the way I coach where possible is not to be a teacher if I can help it, or not to be somebody who is kind of training people or anything like that. The idea is to say, right, here's an experience that I'm going to design for you, an environment that I'm going to design for you. And what we'll do is we'll work together to try and explore what this means to you and what opportunities it affords. And you're working in a very, very similar way, where you're saying, right, let's create an environment, let's present some interesting ideas and questions in that environment, and then let's explore together what that means for each individual, because everybody's family dynamics is different. So they have to interpret that in their own way and determine what that means for you. And that's what I really like about the approach, because I think in a lot of cases, I've definitely seen a lot of organizations basically saying, it's almost like a do's and don'ts scenario. And you're very much opposite to that. You're not saying it's a do's and don'ts. You're saying that there's a range of different approaches, and all of them are valid, but be aware of some of the pros and cons and consequences of certain approaches and different approaches, and then just see that in a different way. And it's opening people's eyes to, I realize that particular approach could have had a different consequence than I probably thought it did when I was sort of in the moment, in the emotional response. And so then we can become more sophisticated in our engagement with the kids when they're in having the kind of experiences that they have.
I love what you've just said there. There's so much I want to unpack about what you've just said.
Keep going.
They'll have to wait. They'll have to wait. Sorry, faithful listeners. So for me, I play a lot of games, and someone said to me, that's a great way of engaging parents. And I kind of take it almost a little bit of an insult. I don't play games to engage, so it's fun and people come out going, Rich is a good speaker, because, I take I'm sure most people know I'm also a church minister. I take funerals as part of my job, and people will leave a funeral saying that was a really thoughtful, lovely funeral. I don't tell any jokes in it or play any games. So I know I can do good public speaking to be engaging. I don't play games because I'm insecure and want to engage people and make them feel happy. I play games for exactly the reason you just said, because it replicates some of the emotional processes that parents go through in that role of being a sports parent. I want to just touch on a little bit on that emotional experience, because that seems to be what parents feedback to me is the bigger challenge about it. It's not necessarily, lots of parents talk about the juggle. It is a juggle being a sports parent, especially if your children's in a pathway, because it's very time consuming. But most parents are capable of managing that time consuming. The challenge comes in that emotional conversation with your child around an injury, or that emotional conversation around your child with your child, which says, how does your academic work fit in with your sports life right now, and how do we hold those things together? Because so parents, so if I can play games, or I'm trying to create a scenario with parents which enables them to feel a little snippet of that emotion, so we can start to coach through how we handle that in that process. So this weekend, I did at Millfield Prep. I did a whole session based on the promise that they're asking you to make as part of Sports Parents Alliance Week. And one of it is that I will provide somewhere that's safe for my children. And I think most parents get that they want somewhere that's safe. But I then challenge parents saying, is safe and comfortable the same thing? Because it's not. And actually what you want from your children's coaches is you want them to be safe. So your child's in a physically safe environment and your child is emotionally secure in that environment, but we want them stretched. So I left 3 envelopes around on the chairs saying do not open, and we only had time for 2, but I asked 2 people to open these envelopes, and inside they had like a mystery task, and it was like right now, do you feel stretched? Yes, because you don't know what's in that envelope, do you? No. Now one of them was to play keepy ups with a hockey stick. The other one was a lady got it and it said, please sing a song. And she was like, I don't know if I want to sing a song. I was like, well, do you feel safe now? Do you feel like we'd be nasty to you? No one's filming. No. Okay, well, let's give it a go then. So that's exactly. And when the lady opened it and said, I've got to sing a song, everybody else kind of gave nervous laughter. And I think that nervous laughter was like, thank goodness I didn't get that envelope. and bless her, I mean, it was no kind of Pavarotti or Susan Boyle, but it was a very nice rendition of Humpty Dumpty. And she kind of felt stretched, but we all cheered her. And afterwards, I was like, can you tell the rest of the group how that felt? Did you feel unsafe, but did you feel uncomfortable? And so I'm hoping the group went away with that thing of when my child is stretched or not in the team that I want them to be in, or the coach is saying that they're not as brilliant as something that I assumed they had, that's different to being unsafe, and I don't need to write a letter or complaint to the teachers about. So trying to help the parents see what good coaching looks like. And I think that, I mean, you've had Susanna Brown on, haven't you? Talk about safe uncertainty. And I think for me, trying to help parents be in that space. So I think that's the first thing I do. And secondly, I think, yes, I'm concerned. You've got a campaign against kind of cones and cues, as it were, drills and cues. And I think sometimes I go into environments, I talk with teachers or coaches, and how they talk about parent engagement is a little bit like drills and cues. You know, we've told parents not to manage their expectations. We've made them sign a declaration. We've talked them through our process, but at no point in that talking through the process was there an opportunity to ask questions about that process, to challenge that process, to offer an alternative. I had the incredible privilege of doing some work for Manchester United this year, which was great fun. But I love what Nick Cox is doing up there, because he was really trying to create an open door and recognize. I mean, it's Manchester United. That's an incredibly prestigious academy by reputation, etc., etc. But he and his team there have worked. They don't just say to parents, we have an open door policy, because lots of people say, oh, we have an open door policy, people don't use it. They make an open door policy. They make their parents walk through that open door so that they're getting the feedback and the challenge, and parents are having the confidence to come to them and raise issues and work around stuff. They're not boxing parents into a queue, just giving them the information. They're really working really hard at engagement, which enables a healthier dialogue between parent, coach and athlete.
I remember you just made me think of. I remember I was doing a workshop with a group of coaches for a particular sport, and it was one of their regional squad days or something. So all the parents were in there, and there was these governing body people at the front talking to these parents, and you had the standard PowerPoint and everything. And I was coming on to do this workshop with coaches afterwards, but I was sort of in the back of the room, just sort of listening in. And I remember somebody at the front who was a representative of the governing body saying, we're trying to create a performance environment for your children, and we need you to be performance parents. And you could hear this audible gasp. And I was like, I was thinking, oh God, you have just destroyed. If you had the room beforehand, you now don't. Because it was already, I could feel the tension in the room. It was like, and it was partly because, these were people who represent the pathway. And so you've either got people in the room who feel as if, their kids are being hard done by, or, the experience they've had today hasn't been particularly good. Or they're there because they want to find out more about the way to go, what to do to move forward and all these sorts of different things. And to sort of be given that instruction or that very kind of direct message around the idea of, we're doing this and you need to do that. Well, I mean, it sets you up to fail, doesn't it? Because you're basically saying, we're kind of like, we know what we're doing, you guys need to know what you're doing. And that for me was a little bit too confrontational. And we may have talked about this.
Well, and also slightly immoral, if I may point out, because one of my challenges in the elite pathway, I hear a lot of stuff. If only parents did this or parents did that, or here's the evidence that says, if parents did this more, they produce children with better mindset. Now that evidence may be true, but ultimately, if parents aren't doing those things, they're not abusing their children. So if there's abuse involved, of course we must step in and challenge that and robustly use the processes that hopefully all clubs have in place and do that. But what we're still talking about is still some fairly subjective personal choices around how you live, isn't it? Yeah. I don't like parents who scream and shout on the sideline. I don't like the fact that in one of the sports teams, one of my children's involved with, there is a child who is massively disrespectful to to officials, and it's clearly fueled by dad. Now, I don't like that. It's not my approach. I've made it very clear to it's given me some great conversations to have with my child about respect, but that's still not necessarily wrong in the sense of that they're not breaking the law. They're not, and it is their choice. If they want to bring somebody up who feels like they've been a victim by every authority in their life, that is their choice. Now, I can see the potential pitfalls in that role, but I also know people who've been brought up as a victim of every choice that they've ever made, and they've still done pretty well for themselves. So I think it's that fine line between us saying there seems to be some correlation between this type of parent behaviour and this type of outcome, and we would encourage you to reflect on that. But I don't think, do we have the right to tell parents that you have to embed this stuff into your parenting to get that outcome? I don't feel we do, actually.
And I think, so the interesting thing from my perspective is, you introduced me to this, and we may have talked about it on the previous podcast, but you introduced me to the model around behaviour change, which I talked with Ross Tucker about, actually.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about the whole stuff they're trying to do with rugby injury cessation and the rule changes and the responses. And I talked about, hugging, shoving, or hugging, nudging, shoving, and smacking. And it feels to me like too much.
And just to be clear, that is a model that's not Stuart's personal life we're talking about there.
And it's metaphorical as well. We're not talking physically.
I will give you a hug, mate, if you want a hug. Don't worry about that. I'm not ashamed.
But in terms of your approach, it's very much in the hug and nudge world more than the shove and smack world.
Well, yes, interestingly, I mean, I met with the guy who's kind of developed that, Professor Jeff French, a few times, and his books are fascinating. And I think, so I do like a standing ovation for parents at the start of every talk I do, whether it's England under-20s parents and their children are about to play, or it's a grassroots club. And do you know what? The British Reserve in me always thinks 2 seconds before I announce it, this is going to die. This is never going to work, Rich. And some places don't really, really go for it, but it does go down well everywhere. And I think in some ways that is a shove. So a shove is something that you can't avoid. So the way I often describe it is if you're going through a village, and there's a speed bump to make you slow down, that speed bump is there to make you change your behavior. You can either ignore the speed bump, but it's going to cause you a bit of extra vibrations. So I think some of the games I play with parents, it is obvious if they choose to opt out in a parents' meeting. So I think sometimes there is a little bit of shoving there. And I do say to coaches, the 5% who are awful in their environment, that's the classic file. 95% of our parents are great, but can we just sort this 5% out? I tend to say to them, you're unlikely to sort the 5% out. Why don't we work with the 95%? Because they're your biggest asset to helping your athletes and children develop talent, whatever that, and potential. But let's have some very good but caring boundaries in for the 5%, and that may occasionally be the proverbial smack to say, actually, sorry, sir, we don't welcome that behaviour here. I mean, I was at a sports fixture a couple of weeks ago, and there was a parent whose behaviour from the opposition was just really out of order. I love Russell Oshaw's approach to this. He's just like a bee to a bonnet with those kind of parents. But he doesn't confront them. He just goes and stands and chats with them to distract them from that kind of behaviour. And I think so I think you can kind of have I think in some cases you do have to ban parents if it's awful, if their impact on your environment is so detrimental. But that's a very, very small percentage we're talking about. Of all the listeners you've got who are on all the coaches and parents, there'll be very few parents whose behaviour fits in that category. The majority of parents fit in that category of how do we hug them so they feel welcome, safe, secure in this environment, valuable part of it. How do we nudge them into healthier behaviour, and how do we shove that behaviour sometimes through the game? So I try and use games to shove behaviour, if that makes sense.
I'm going to call it a firm nudge.
A firm nudge, yes.
Yeah.
A firm nudge, yes. I like that. We're creating a new category. That's a new model. We'll patent it. But yes, I mean, I think it is a firm nudge. So Nick Wilkinson, who's a friend of mine and is all over Twitter, if anyone's on Twitter, he uses the lollipop, which if a parent's being literally a bit too gobby on the sideline, he'll give them a lollipop. And getting a lollipop, and to start with, that made me feel really uncomfortable. But actually, the more I think about it, I think that's a really good, whether it's a shove or a smack, it kind of fits in between those two. But if you've got a good bond with your parent community and you know them well, I think if you walk up to a complete stranger and say you're being too noisy, here's a lollipop, I don't think that's going to help. But if you know your parent community, at your parents' meeting, you say, how do we help us manage some times when we get a bit excited? Do we all take chairs to sit down on, or do we and here's the lollipop idea, do we all buy into that? I think if you've got good buy-in, I think that's a good community shove stroke smack. to help parents do that. And I think Nick had come up with a really good idea there.
Yeah, I think that's nice as well. That's a nice one. I mean, I think the reason I brought it up was I think too often before thinking about, I mean, I actually think that if you take all those 4 different behavioural change approaches, you want to try as much as possible to have all of them, because sometimes the hugs and the nudges don't quite work. So sometimes you need something firmer, sometimes you need something more drastic. But for example, quite often I think people just tend to defer to the almost like the smacking version of, so for example, right, we've got a silent sidelines policy now. No one can say anything. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, right? I'm not saying that's not the right thing to do, because I think in certain contexts, it's probably the only thing they can do. But I think you want to get to that point, having tried all the others and not really been able to change the behaviour. That's when you bring the policy in. Otherwise, people feel as if it's too severe a policy or an approach, because it's almost like, well, where's this come from? That's a bit extreme, isn't it? Well, what the hell's that?
Totally, and I'm a big fan for collaborative thinking and collaborative engagement. And I think you, again, if you had a really good dialogue kind of parents meeting early in the season and say, listen, why don't we try some things that might help us reflect on what we do? And you put, 6 or 7 ideas out there. And if one of them was a silent weekend, a silent game, why don't we just try it? Not because we think we're bad, but actually just to see what it does to us. I have no problem with a silent weekend as kind of part of almost a parable of parent engagement throughout the season, just to, again, a tool to help parents reflect. It's not as a punishment, I think, but I recognise that there are probably some places in sport where it's got so awful that they just have to kind of put that in to start off with and kind of build from there. I think Professor Jeff French writes a really good article. It's a good article. If you just Google him, Jeff French and nudges, there's a good article that he wrote, or took part in. It's on the BBC website. And most government behavioural change activities fall into the nudge category, and they're just not successful. And so that's why he wrote these papers and outlines a process for how you do this. And I suppose I'm probably one of the few in the sports world who's trying to apply it to parents at the moment. And there might be others. I'd love to hear from them, because I'd love to hear your ideas for each of those categories. But for me, it's trying to recognise, like you say, you need a tapestry of all of these. You need to, because the others work really well unless you're hugging people in the first place. And if you're just loving people but letting them get away with behaviour at all costs, that's just not very helpful. And parent, again, what we hear from sports parents is, it's a manic lifestyle, and that's one of my challenges to coaches. Often is they'll bemoan that parents haven't volunteered, or parents don't read all the emails. I'm like, yeah, but if I've got 3 kids, I've got emails from 3 sports clubs, I've got emails from 2 schools at the moment, because they're across schools. I've got my own family stuff going on. I'm trying to run a church, trying to run a business. Now, that isn't an excuse for poor behaviour on my part, but it does mean I don't always read all the school emails. Thankfully, I've got a very diligent wife who does. My kids would miss so much if they did. That's just good co-parenting on my behalf, or lazy, depending on how you're going to define it. But I think we need to be giving parents a little bit more of a break on kind of some of the busyness, and a lot of the nudges. A lot of the nudges are missed because of the business. So the nice sign on the side of the pitch that respect people, that no one disagrees with, but parents aren't walking to a pitch looking around, look at this beautiful pitch and this beautiful sign. They're like, have you got your water bottle? Have you remembered? What time am I picking you up? Do you know you're going home with Jeff, or Dad's picking you up tonight because I've got to get Lucy from this, or what? That's what's going on in a parent's mind when they walk past that sign, or a lot of parents' minds. And so I think for me, we need to kind of get a far more diverse approach to parent engagement, which I'm encouraged with seeing. I mean, I think so. At our little church, we serve a community meal once a week, and everybody brings food to it, and it's brilliant. And and if you can't afford to bring food, then you just come and eat. It's what people know, and it's a lovely thing. We do it every Monday night. And to start off with, it was what I would call Iceland beige. It's quite a poor community, and Iceland produces quite cheap. Any other supermarket of that ilk, and it's just like Iceland beige buffet food. It's high carbohydrate. It's not very good for you, but it puts food in your belly, kind of thing. And I think parent engagement has been for too long Iceland beige parent engagement. We've just given them a PowerPoint with loads of stuff in, or we've got somebody in, and there are lots of good people out there to come and talk on a topic in a school environment, but they've given an hour's lecture and it could be really, really good. They could really know their stuff, but then we've not scaffolded support for parents to engage in the outcomes of that lecture post that person coming in. So again, when I come in and do talks, I basically say the cost for me to come in includes some coaches CPD, because a good hour with Non-Perfect Dad will help hug parents, will help parents feel a hug, but will it change behavior long term unless parents get involved? And that's part of the reason why I'm trying to now start an online alliance of sports parents as well, because I want that alliance to be a reflective space where we hug, shove, nudge. We can't smack anybody in there. Well, I suppose we could ban people if they were naughty in the
metaphorically smack, yeah.
Metaphorically smack. People for, so where we can start to have a deeper tapestry, and I can carry on the conversation with parents to try and keep that coaching element dripping on. Because my fear is, Stuart, that there'll be like 4 or 5 years where parent engagement is really popular, because I think it is. I think, I'm fortunate enough to arrive in this space at a time where it's popular. But in 4 or 5 years' time, people will go, yeah, we put lots of effort into that, but nothing really happened. And for me, that'll be because, we started to have more parents' meetings, but we didn't really think about the nuts and bolts of how we help parents move through the processes of what's really affecting them in their sports parent life. And we just pretty much dealt with sidelines, which it does need some attention, but is not the bigger issue in parent engagement as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, for me, trying to quieten the sideline because, people are being overzealous is a relatively minor irritation, where in comparison to some of the issues that some of the children face. I mean, I see all the time. For example, I saw the other day, and I see it quite regularly, actually. There's a couple of kids who have got some quite serious behavioural challenges. So, for example, if the team's losing, which is fairly regular, they, the emotional side, they almost become overcome with emotion and can't cope with it, and walk off the pitch and or are berating themselves or whatever it might be. And I see this a lot, in the teams that my son's involved with or in other teams, and all that sort of stuff. Now, for me, that I think needs really looking into, because there's a reason for that happening. And again, right, I don't think there's anything that parent is necessarily doing in that context or in that scenario that is driving that behavior in that child. However, there are probably some things that they could do that would really help that young person to be able to deal with the emotional overload that comes with playing a game of sport, or playing sport.
And you know what, Stuart, I reckon most of the parents who see that as children behave like that they're probably at home trying to look for stuff that's helpful and supportive anyway. They're probably at home thinking, what do I do about this? And if look, sports coaches aren't there to fix all ills in society. I mean, as good as the volunteer coaches are and things like that, but if they can help nudge some of that and support and hug and give that firm shove behaviour, some support around that, and help parents just be a little bit reflective, but not in a kind of it's all your fault kind of way, in a kind of, because I recognise I've got 3 wonderful children, but I recognise part of their reactions to certain issues they have got from me, and sometimes that is a healthy reaction, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes their reaction is them just trying to work out how to react like dad did, but because they're kids, they're getting it a bit wrong. Mm-hmm. So that they're trying to work around those boundaries or conflicts at home, and they're thinking, what would mum or dad say to me? But they're just kids, so they're going to kind of play and get it wrong. But I agree with you. I get concerned when I see kind of consistent behaviour from parents or from children on the sideline, that you just think, actually, if there was a conversation here between the child and the parent, would the child say, I'm really happy about this? Would the parent say, I'm really happy about it? So how do we scaffold conversations which enable both parties to move forward?
So I'm just conscious that we did say 10 minutes when we were teasing,
yeah, we did.
But I'm still going to keep going, because I think we can leave it. We might be able to leave this towards the end. We'll see how we get on. I want to just segue onto something though, because you just talked about this idea of kind of like the Iceland beige food, right? And again, that's a metaphor that I think is really working for me in lots of ways, because I actually think that's probably quite true of kind of a lot of coaching experiences as well. So, I think a lot of it is fairly humdrum, average, just stuff that they might have seen somewhere that's delivered, and it's just doesn't have that kind of engagement level. So for me, I think, you definitely, in terms of what we're trying to advocate here, in terms of an experience for children, a sports experience for children that is so powerful, so engaging, so kind of full of meaning for them, that they kind of just can't get enough of it. Trying to almost create that kind of video game type scenario we've used a lot, and you're doing something very similar in the parenting space, or at least engaging parents in a similar way. So the movement away from the beigeness is definitely something that we want to be glorious technicolor, don't we?
We do, yeah. Well, eat the rainbow, the nutritionists tell us, don't they? So I think that's what we want. So we, in pathway sports, let's just because I recognise the resources in grassroots sports and pathway sports are slightly different. So how would I expect to see the rainbow in those two contexts? In pathway sports, which is where I spend most of my time, I would expect to see meals put on for parents. I would expect to see parents, because I think when you eat together, you get to know each other a bit more. So I would expect to see that. I would expect to see, yes, information given to parents, but that is short and concise. One club sent me their parent handbook and it was like 30 pages long, and I just died inside. Whereas Guildford Hockey Club have just taken my kind of one-page model, which I don't think is infallible, but it was a deliberate attempt to shove coaches to that thing. I said, you can write your parent engagement piece. It can only be 1 page long. That's all I'm going to give you. And so I've seen some really lovely creative ways of doing that. I think, again, sorry to harp on about Millfield, but they're starting to try to have podcasts for their parents or blogs for their parents that just enable parents to do things slightly differently. England Netball, who I'm not involved in at the moment, but happy to be so in the future, but England Netball on their under 18s or under 20s, I can't remember which one, have had parent representatives on their management group, so those parent representatives have not been involved in selection or coaching decisions, but every time there's a tour or there's a deeper pastoral set of issues, those parents have been in on those conversations to make sure the parent perspective was heard on those things. So, for example, my children's school, well-meaning, but sent out 3 emails to us about 3 trips asking for shed loads of money, all within a month of each other. And part of me was just like, I know, big institution, it's hard, but why was nobody talking about this? Why was nobody thinking, what are the pressure points in a child's life? So Christmas is a family time. So I think that we need to be kind of protective. Mother's Day, I went to a massive festival for a sport, a big pathway festival that had 400 or 500 athletes involved in. It was on Mother's Day and it started at 8:30 in the morning. And part of me just wanted to say, look, I know if these kids are going to make it and represent England and GB, they're going to have to give up going to Mother's Day. I know that, but they're all under 15s at the moment. And what are we saying to their mums? And do you know, if that was the only date the diaries worked, why the hell didn't someone go down to Tesco's and buy 400 daffodils, which would have cost like 50 quid, and every parent, mum or mother or woman when they arrived got a daffodil? Why are we not kind of having this tapestry? I think in pathway stuff, it does include getting experts in, psychologists, etc., to come and talk to the parents to give the latest understanding and research. But then on the back of that is then quality support about how to apply that and how to work out what to take in, because there are lots of psychologists and experts who say all sorts of things about parenting, and most of it's well-meaning and helpful, but it can get a little bit confusing. I think the gold standard at and pathway stuff is, and you can do this at grassroots as well, is to have at least 1 coaching session a year where the parents are coached on the pitch or in the event. So get the parents in the swimming pool or in a canoe or with a hockey stick in their hands. Gary Street at Harlequins does a great thing with this. Parents, bring your trainers next week. You are joining in, and obviously they're not playing full contact rugby, but they're on a 4G and they're being walked through a training session. So it's lots of fun, but also they're being coached the way their boys are being coached, so that the parents are starting to experience that and understand that. I think England Hockey Pathway do a great day of having parents educated for a whole day. But I would like to see people who do things like that then work out how to filter that down into the regional structures, etc. So I think that's at the kind of top end. Those are the exciting things I've seen there. And I think at grassroots, I think it's socials. I think it's thinking about parent socials. I think it's certainly about having a parents' meeting at the beginning of the year, but it isn't a PowerPoint with 500 words on. I went to speak at a conference recently, and the first 2 hours were just death by PowerPoint. So much information given, I don't even think the presenter could remember what information they'd given at the beginning. So more of a dialogue, a lot more of a dialogue. And on my website, or certainly on my YouTube, there's loads of games that grassroots clubs can easily replicate. I recognise that, but how many grassroots clubs have got a set Jenga around? You can replicate that game that we've done there. I think an end of the season questionnaire. Let's get parents honest feedback. And I hear lots of times from coaches, well, parents just need to learn they're not the coaches. No, they're not the coaches, but parents watch your sessions week in, week out. Actually, they might be able to assess your coaching better than you can assess your coaching, because they've seen more of your coaching than maybe you have if you've never filmed yourself or had an assessor in. So I would still ask coaching questions in the end of season or half-season questionnaire to the parents, not because you're going to change your coaching style based on what the parents said, but if you ask the parents, what coaching style, what words would you use to describe our coaching style? What do you think we've been working on in training? How structured do you think our sessions are unstructured? Those answers are going to give you clues as to what parents are seeing. Now, I know we have to accept that parents have a bunch of biasness about what coaching should look like, because when we were coached, it looked very different. But I still think there's some really good information there. If you've been working on something and the parents don't tell you that, that is a real eye-opener. I went to I had the real privilege recently of doing some all-staff training days in schools on parent engagement, and I asked pet staff, what do you want your children to be like when they leave your classroom and go on to the next teacher? How do you want the next teacher to go? Oh, this child is X, Y, Z. And so teachers answer that question. Very rarely do teachers or sports coaches answer that question by sport or subject specific answers, by the way. Normally it's character words, which is exciting. And then I would look at the school's value system, and hardly any of those words hardly ever come up in what their teachers want to hand on. So for me, it's like saying to the senior leadership team, you need to do a bit more work on helping people understand these values or ditch them, because it's clear that people haven't bought into them yet, because they've been asked a question. You've got all these lovely words about the type of children you want to be producing, but when I asked your staff what type of children they want to produce, they didn't mention any of your words. So again, for me, if parents are feeding back on your coaching, and you're not hearing phrases or seeing phrases that reflect what you want to be about, then I think that's a really good reflection process for you to go around. So parents can really help coaches get better at coaching if the right type of question. And you need to be a bit self-aware and a bit resilient to that. You might get the odd bad answer, but most of the time. So for me, that's what a tapestried, non-beige, eating the rainbow looks like in the parent engagement world. And it looks like parents involved in halftime huddles or the end of game huddles. It looks like parents being given information. So I went to a great school. I was at Sherborne last week, and they put on their team sheet, we've been working on this week, so you will see this in the match. How many times can you notice it? So I thought that's just a great piece. Again, a beautiful bit of dynamic stuff, letting parents know. Now, actually, in fairness to the guys at Sherborne, it was a little bit too technical. So it's like, I played rugby. I understand a little bit about rugby, but I'm struggling to quite get the nuances of that. So can you just put that in parent speak a little bit more? But really, really good practice to have half a paragraph at the end of your team sheet saying, parents, this is what to look for this week.
Now, the cynical side of me, Richard, is saying that in the pathway where you've got professionals working in the pathway, these sorts of things we can expect. And in the grassroots, I think there's some lovely, simple, actionable things there that I think really work. I've just been reflecting myself, parent socials, that's such a simple thing to do. Cheese and wine evening, a little bit of casual chat, maybe just maybe a very short thing at the start, just saying, kind of welcome to the season. These are the things we're looking to do. I mean, my club, or most of the clubs that I'm involved with, always bemoan the lack of volunteers. Well, what's the best way to have a casual conversation with somebody and asking them how they can get involved in helping? Then do that. And just get people to casually. I mean, I actually do see quite a lot of stuff as well, by the way, to talks about volunteering. I mean, we love volunteering. I mean, very, very big part of what I do day to day in terms of, trying to encourage more sports volunteers and the value of volunteers. I see a lot of clubs, essentially, people are voluntold. So like, you will turn up on one day of the year or 2 days of the year, and you will man a stand, or you will do this, or you will do that. And that is an obligation, and you must do that for your kids. So you pay for your kids to do the sport, and then you have to volunteer as well. So that's being voluntold. Not a fan of that. What I would prefer to do is to have a casual conversation with somebody and to find the people who are saying, "Oh yeah, I'll help with that." Because it can be a small thing, a big thing, and you want people who, if volunteering, if it's to bring about the personal well-being and the sense of social cohesion and collective endeavour, it should be people who are willingly saying, I can do that, I can help, I want to help, I'd like to help. And it's just finding a route for them or finding a way for them to help. And once you get them in with a little thing, then often that grows into a bigger thing. And what better way than a parent social to do that?
Mate, totally. And it facilitates conversation, doesn't it? Because I get really frustrated about how lazy I become when I have experienced a bunch of people in a context for a while. I then assume a bunch of biasness about that whole people group. And I think for me, if we can find mechanisms for building rapport, hearing people's stories a bit. Once we social, you get to say, what do you do? What have the stresses and strains been this week? You get to hear people's stories. You get to realise maybe why they can't volunteer. Because actually, when you hear what's going on in their lives, you're like, flipping heck, the fact that you even get your kid to a sports club is a miracle. So well done for doing that. But we also start to hear little bits of people's stories and go, oh, that'd be great if you could help that with that, or it'd be great. Or we start to shift our organisation so that it fits the skill sets of the people that we've already got there. So one of the things that, I play a lot of games with parents. One of my mates here on Harrow Hill is a cabinet maker. Now, I crudely called him a carpenter, but apparently that's like comparing an F1 driver to a taxi driver. That was a bad mistake. But he makes all sorts of things for us willingly. He's very generous. His boss loves the fact that he helps out the local church for stuff or non-perfect dowry stuff. So we now, instead of going, what could we do? We say, okay, so we've got this going on, but how can Chris's skills help us in this? Rather than going, let's come up with a harebrained idea we've got nobody to help with. Actually, we have got Chris, who's a cabinet maker, posh carpenter, who can help us. Sorry, cabinet maker, but who can help us do this? And yeah, I mean, I get one of the things I get really frustrated with. I see on social media is you're not allowed an opinion until you've volunteered, which I think is really harsh. And again, just very arrogant, very us, and then very beige, drills and cones kind of parenting engagement. And I think you're right. Socials, and if you were really smart, you'd put something on for the kids at the same time. Also, I would say, and I've not said this publicly, but it's something I would help to do. We have Parents in Sports Week. We obviously have all the athletes. When is somebody going to do a siblings in Sports Week? Maybe that's the thing we should do next year at some point, Stuart, because siblings get dragged in elite sports. They get dragged really everywhere, but even in grassroots sports, even my daughters, for my son to play rugby, they've got their own little tent. I mean, we've got a whole rugby kit. We've got a tent and a blanket and all sorts of things, and then no one else has brought a pop-up tent inside a rugby pitch, so the tent's usually full of kids and food and all sorts of things. But actually, the siblings do a lot. So I think if you could have an evening for siblings, and if you're in a pathway team, I don't see why you can't have an evening where one of the first team celebrities comes down and spends an evening with the siblings, not with the future potential athletes, but with their siblings, and says, actually, we're going to do an evening at the sports stadium or whatever it is, and we're going to have a great fun time. And it's not just going to be based on whether you're any good at cricket or hockey or rugby or football. It's actually just going to be based on you're a sibling of one of our kids, so we recognise what you do, and parents will be blown away by that. The first club that starts doing genuine sibling days, they will have the best fan parents after that, without a shadow of a doubt.
Definitely. What I was cynical. I'm not cynical, but I could hear a cynical voice saying about, say, the likes of Millfield doing some of these fantastic things. Well, the cynical voice might say, well, it's in their interest too, isn't it? Because those parents are their employers. But that, for me, betrays where people are going wrong, because that might be part of the motivation, perhaps, right? But it's not just that. It's about a genuine recognition of the parent as a stakeholder in the child athlete experience. Now, a lot of people think, right, my job as coach, or my job as pathway provider or whatever, is the athlete, not nothing else around them, right? So they don't consider, for example, Mother's Day. They don't consider schools, holidays. They don't consider. Now, this is about this is talent inclusion. Okay, so people think about like talent inclusion. Oh, okay, that's about diversity, and that's about getting, kind of having more people from different ethnicities involved in our pathways, or more people from different socioeconomic groups in our pathways. No, that is part of it, right? But talent inclusion is as simple as thinking about the impact on the wider family. And the sibling point is a brilliant one, because if a talent pathway organizer or creator, whatever, thinks that it's okay for kids to travel an hour and a half to 2 hours on an evening to access a training program, and the impact that has on the parent, and the impact that has on a sibling who might have to come along for that journey because it's the only possible way for that individual to get there. And so there's a sacrifice of 4 hours a week that sibling has to make sitting in a car, and then well, it's more than 4 hours, because in reality, once you've had some food, everything else, and the costs associated, right? So these people respond. They think about, oh yeah, we're going to create this great experience for the athlete, but they're not creating a great experience for the family. So it is by definition not inclusive, and also there's an awful lot of people that are excluded from that scenario. Now that's a double whammy, right? Why? Because first and foremost, well, you've already narrowed down your talent pool.
Totally.
Why would you want to do that? You want as many as possible for as long as possible, as good as possible, to quote Mark O'Sullivan. But apparently we're happy to just only go with the ones who can either afford it or have got the wherewithal to be able to get to that. So we've naturally done that. That's fighting against you. And secondly, what you're doing is you're creating a talent exclusion straight away from the outset, right? So you're already presenting yourself as exclusive, which very few sports are trying to do. They don't want to, so they want to do the opposite way. Yeah. But it's because you're not thinking about the environment around the athlete as much as you're thinking about the athlete. And so for me, that's the mistake that people are making, and Millfield, they would do that. No. This is for everybody to do, because parents are as they're an extension of the child in many ways, because firstly, the child doesn't turn up without the parent. Secondly, the child, won't have as great experience as possible if the parent, once they go home, are disgruntled about. I mean, I have to admit, right? Apologies for the rant, right? But
it's all right. I'm feeling your energy.
I had to have a word with myself the other day, and partly through my wife, actually, because I find it very difficult to be a sports parent, because very often I'm the coach as well. So, I'm very much in control of environments. And in some of the sports that my son's got involved with of late, where I'm not the coach and I'm not responsible, I am literally just the parent on the sideline. And I watch things happen in certain environments, not necessarily to my son's space, but certainly across the board. I see things happening that I think are flat out wrong, and in some cases flat out dangerous. Now, this is coaching behaviors, okay? And these are mostly volunteer parent coaches, the people we're trying to reach, people we're trying to talk to and engage. And I see things happening all the time that I think this is not only morally incorrect, but it's also dangerous to the well-being, physical and mental well-being of these young people. And I speak to parents on the sideline. I mean, and I'm talking about like parents who are educators, right? They work in education, say things, and not loudly, but quietly to me, do things. And I think, you've lost your mind. You have lost your mind. What is it about this environment and this culture that turns you that makes you say that? But you would never say that in a professional context in a million years. And I know this for a fact, because these are people who are personal friends of mine. So I find myself in this scenario where people are just kind of almost losing sight of what is important in some of these sports experiences and shining a light on those things, which is, I think, what you do so brilliantly in a very kind of, whether it's a firm nudge or it's a game or whatever, it's just actually just shining a light on something and allowing, I think for some people go away from your sessions, I think, and they feel like they've been smacked because they've had such a moment of revelation. It's not an intention, but they're going, oh God, yeah. oh my God. And so I just circling back to this, I had to have a word with myself, because I would come back from those environments. Like, firstly, I don't want to be there, right? Because you have to stand there. Why? Because, the kids might get injured. Okay, fine. So I have to stand there in the cold. There's loads of other things that I really could be doing. I'm, mega busy, blah, blah, blah. But I've got to stand in the cold watching this stuff that I feel is, and I have to sit there quietly biting my lip. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got to say something at some point, but what am I going to say and how am I going to say it? Because I don't want to be the guy who comes along and tells everybody what to do. And I end up coming away really grumpy. And I don't respond particularly well to my son. I don't give him as much encouragement as he would. I get home and I'm pretty grumpy. Claire's like, what's wrong with you? You just hate that sport, don't you? You just can't stand it, can you? And I'm like, no, it's not that. I'm so wound up and frustrated. So I'm kind of part of the problem in many ways, because I'm not acting. I'm being really grumpy. So I've decided, at the very least, I shouldn't be grumpy with Evan. I shouldn't be grumpy with the rest of the family. So that's something I'm definitely going to change, because I can control that. I can't control the entire environment, except I am going to offer to provide some a learning and development experience for them, and possibly also offer or suggest to them that they get in touch with your good self to look at some experiences as well. And we may even do a double act on this one. Who knows?
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
But anyway, that's
mate,
rant over.
No, I think what you've hit on is just that. For me, I think it's a bit like an iceberg, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently. What we see as kind of presenting behaviours, or how we are, is fueled by and funneled by something that's a lot deeper in each of us. So when you go to watch a sports match, you are Stu Armstrong, Talent Equation podcast host. You work for a national governing body, and you have ridiculous amounts of experience, and you know a lot of stuff around this. Mr. Curse of knowledge. Mr. Banker. Well, knowledge and Mr. Banker, who's gone there that week, might have had the best week of his life, and so he's completely hungover on a Sunday morning when he's watching his kids play, and so his tongue might still be a bit freer. The next person on the queue might be co-parenting a child. Now, one of my major biases, I work with a lot of people who are trying to co-parent children, and it's in a very ugly part of that. That's part of the work we do as a church, is supporting the local authority in doing that. So I recognise there are lots of people who co-parent children, and it works really, really well. But there are an awful lot of people who also co-parent children, and it doesn't work well at all. And I know lots of dads who get it in the neck when they return child because their behaviour is seen as different and down, or they had a bad weekend with you. And our system, this might have said to people, our system, despite all the research, certainly I would suggest is still weighted towards the mum's experience. And so there are dads who don't want their kid to go home having had a bad experience because they're worried about losing contact the next week. And so that they want their kid to win because they misunderstand that winning equals a good experience. That might be why they're more heightened. So for me, there might be a couple there. I'm sure you've never had this experience. I've never had this experience. I lie. Where you've gone to an event as a family and in the car was just a bit of a scream off and everyone was arguing and nobody was happy with one another. And then you get out and put your British middle class faces on. Hi, we're happy. We're a happy middle class family. We're all really, really good here. Some people will be worried about parents. We're now getting to the age where caring for parents and things like that becomes more predominant. I've got 3 wonderful children who are not perfect, who are trying to work out what it is to be kids. And each of them goes to good schools, but there are challenges and tensions there that we're trying to wrestle with. There are certainly weeks when my children have gone to sport and I have just honestly thought, Stu, please let them win and please let him score a hat-trick today, because he needs something this week. He's had a really awful week, and just please let him be picked up by this experience. So, and I'm not saying any of those things are none of those things justify bad behaviour. None of those things justify bad behaviour. But what I'm trying to say is I think the tapestry of the human experience and the complexity of the human experience is why the kind of beige parenting stuff that we've been talking about for me doesn't fit into your angst and doesn't fit into some of those other challenges. And I think for me, it's around, I think, having a bit more compassion on parents. Not easy, because there are some that kind of wind me up in all the tips of my own. And also trying to understand that what we see on the side of the sports pitch or in the sports environment is just the tip of the family iceberg. And our parent engagement, particularly in pathways because they have more resources, and like you say, grassroots is a little bit tricky, but pathway parent engagement needs to be helping parents focus on the bit of the iceberg that isn't seen, rather than the bit of the iceberg they present. And certainly our parent engagement should not be focused at just dealing with the presenting stuff. It should be trying to help parents explore the hidden part of their lives that only them and their children really know about. And it should be done, I think, with compassion, but encouragement, etc. Now, I'm not therefore suggesting that pathway teams all provide family therapy for every family, because that's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is we don't take that cheap and easy, like that's just going on the top there, because some people might see you and go, oh, arrogant, what's it? Look at him, Stu Armstrong, does all these things in sport and he's chundering away at us. And actually, but there's more going on there, because you are actually genuinely passionate about kids' experience, things like that. So you wouldn't want to be judged by the top of the iceberg behaviour and frustrations that I'm sure leak out of you. I wouldn't want to be. And I know even with my own kids' grassroots clubs, I probably have overstepped the mark a few times by kind of pointing out things that I probably could have left, to be honest with you, and probably just been a bit more encouraging with some of the coaches. Sometimes I point out things that I think essentially had to have attention drawn to them because they were of a safeguarding nature. So I'm sorry, that for me there's always just a big red line there that, I will always cross. If there's a safeguarding issue, that for me, I will always cross and have those awkward conversations. But I think if we can get parent engagement, which it links round, our 10 minutes is probably up, isn't it, to coming round to a place where we can have healthier dialogue. For me, this whole thing has got to be about dialogue. And I do feel for the grassroots coach, because they're volunteers and they don't have lots of time. And I do feel for the pathway coaches. Most of the pathway coaches I meet who work in what the external world must think is really glamorous environments. They get to wear a very famous badge on their chest, on their tracksuit, and they get to go to work with some famous people. But actually, you and I both know those guys ladies are under an awful lot of pressure. Their budgets are often quite tight, and there's a huge amount of expectation from the wider club for them to produce certain people to fill the gaps of retiring senior players without much care for how hard they work. Most of the people I meet in pathways are working 70, 80-hour weeks, and I'm not, I've got great kind of admiration for what they do. But being in the professional sports world has kind of burst that bubble of like, wow, for me a little bit, because I just think these are great people on limited resources trying to do some great stuff. And so I think for me, how do we have conversations around that bottom part of the iceberg that isn't necessarily expecting everyone to be therapists, but is helping us work that through?
So you're right. We have squeezed the juice out of this orange for as long as we possibly can. So that takes us to the collaboration that we have been working on, and we are pleased to announce, or pleased to launch this week, which is Conversations for Growth. Tell everybody what we've been up to.
Well, I think, Stuart, you were very kind in your response to the book, Conversations for the Journey. And I'm conscious that those were 40 questions, one question each page. And I tried not to do it so it was like, ask it this way and you'll get this. I tried to kind of give parents an opportunity to contextualize that into their story. But each of those questions and the themes of those questions, there was such a richer conversation to have, and we'd started to have those rich conversations, and we thought, let's film these and offer these to people. And so what we've done is we have filmed 10-minute videos, and what we're offering people to see if they like it and to start to see the value they can get from the whole course is an opportunity to sign up for Conversations for Growth free, which is a 2-minute snippet of each of the videos emailed to you each day. And what I've loved about what we've done is we have deliberately looked at some of these challenging conversations, but we've not just taken the one-size-fits-all glib answer. We've tried to spend a good chunk of time getting into these challenges, being honest about our own parenting successes and failures, but it's kind of like it's almost like Smith and Jones, two blokes on a bar stool in a sports stadium, just kind of without the brilliant comedy, I hasten to add. But it's both of us trying to help parents get into some of the deeper stuff around these conversations. And what we wanted to do, I think, is provide an incredibly unique set of conversations that would enable parents to go, firstly, wow, I'm normal. It's normal that these things happen. I don't think your honesty about your rant then, that's very normal that parents leave that a sports field with frustration, but somehow we've got to this place where we're not allowed to feel like that. Parents aren't allowed to feel frustrated because it's all about the child's journey, and how dare a parent feel frustrated because it's their child's journey, and it is the child's journey. But do you know what? I need a space where I can be honest about how I'm feeling and my frustrations, and then really getting into those conversations you can have with your children, which avoid the pain and increase your child's ability to express their potential, to grow their potential. So it's conversations for growth. It kind of says what it says on the tin, doesn't it, really? We're trying to have honest conversations for growth with our children through those processes. And if you go to conversationsforgrowth.co.uk, you can sign up for the free course. And if you really like that, because we want to be supportive, we're very grateful to the Talent Equation community, you can get the paid course at nonperfectdad.com/Talent Equation. There's an even bigger discount there for Talent Equation listeners. But I'm really excited about this. And if you're a coach, I'd really encourage you, if your children have flown the nest and this is not quite the right resource, or you haven't got kids yet, I would really encourage you to share this in your team's WhatsApp groups. As I hear it, parents' WhatsApp groups are the bane of coaches' lives. So let's put a good resource into there saying, listen, here's a great free resource by two honest parents. Why don't you sign up for it? And you can just drop that web link in WhatsApp and it opens the page automatically for people, and people can go and have a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a load of fun to do. And like I said, I said to you when we did it, actually, that it was actually a very useful piece of reflection for me as well, just actually having the conversation. So my genuine hope is that by us getting together, exploring a few subjects together from the perspective of parent, but also from the perspective of parent who coaches, because that obviously that's got that added challenge and added dimension, and just sharing a few ideas, thoughts, experiences, challenges, that it might act as either it might resonate with somebody and think, yeah, that's something that I've experienced, and actually that's something I need to reflect on and think about a different approach to. Or it might give them a little practical tidbit that they can think, you know what, that'll be really useful for me. I'm going to take that into my environment and see what I can do with that. If we hit a couple of those little nudges through the conversations, because it's there's about an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of content there. Then we're in. We'll have done our job, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely think that the sports parent life is really hectic, and if parents can have the courage to just say, actually, do you know what, I am going to watch 2 hours, or certainly I'm going to watch the free ones to start off with, so that's about 20 minutes worth spread out over 10 days. But I'm going to watch that and just give myself permission to breathe in and out my parenting, and just have a little bit of a reflection on it, get into my own deeper iceberg stuff, as we've been talking about. I think for me, I know we're all going to reflect on our parenting when our kids have left home. This is a chance to kind of reflect on it now before they left home. None of us are going to, from this course or coming to any of my talks, are going to be perfect parents after this. But what we can do is pick up a bunch of skills. And one of the reasons I love doing Non-Perfect Dad is I am a far better parent because I spend a lot of time talking to parents and going through these issues, because it makes me constantly think about what I'm communicating, how am I managing my pain and my children's pain, my children's joy and excitement through the whole process. And I am absolutely convinced that if parents give themselves the space to watch this, it will help. I'm absolutely convinced if coaches watch it anyway, it'll give them a deeper insight into some of the challenges that parents go on. So again, like we've been talking about, if you're not a parent or your kids have left home and it's been a while since you parented, I think this would be a great resource just to remind you of some of the complexities that go on in parent lives, and to help you not provide Iceland beige material. For me, I think what we're offering here is a rich rainbow, eating the rainbow, to go back to the previous analogy, because I think we're not offering a one-size-fits-all. That really bugs me in the parenting world. Here's how to be a sports parent, just do X, Y, Z. It doesn't work like that. What we're trying to say is, here's some topics, here's some tips. We're giving lots of practical suggestions. We're not going to leave people hanging, but stuff that they can contextualize, hopefully very easily, into their own home environment.
Awesome. Like I said, I really enjoyed making it. So I'm hoping that if people get at least some of the same enjoyment, I mean, it felt like it was a bit indulgent, to be honest. But if people get at least some of the same enjoyment and some of the same value from it, then that'll be a brilliant thing. Really enjoyed having you back, and really great having being able to catch up again and have some good conversations. I mean, cones and drills and cues for parents, loving that. That's fantastic. Beige food, or Iceland beige food. Poor old Iceland, but I think they've actually improved their product line. I have to say, I don't want to be critical of Iceland.
No, I realise that. Sorry.
Their chicken goujons, to be honest, are just to die for. So I always, whenever.
What colour are they?
They are a bit beige, sadly, but as long as you put them with other vegetables, it's fine.
I know. Sorry, it's a bit of a character.
I always accidentally, in inverted commas, overcook those chicken goujons, because then, you can't finish them. I'll just have to finish those off for you then. Terrible. Really bad. Got to stop doing that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, the lollipop. And then, you've just absolutely given so many good ideas for people in pathways and people in the grassroots. There's loads in there. And then the final one around the iceberg, and actually seeing what we see in front of us is very much just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more underneath that is probably driving that behavior. So for me, 3 big, meaty, chunky takeaways from our conversation today. Been great to have you on board.
Mate, I've loved it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. See you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.